Mozambique in southern Africa has been rocked by unrest since the elections of the 9th of October, which was won by the ruling Frelimo party. It has claimed at least 130 lives. The opposition in the country claimed that the vote was rigged in favour of Frelimo candidate Daniel Chapo. With me to talk about that is Tertius Jacobs, the head analyst of Mozambique and East Africa of the Focus Group. Hi, Tertius. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
So it's a big day in Mozambique.
This is essentially the pivot point, perhaps, that everything has been leading up to. It has been much anticipated, and the opposition has been putting a lot of pressure on the Constitutional Council, not only to get the results out, but also to make sure that whatever comes out is representative of what the opposition believes the truth to be.
So what do you think the consequences will be?
What we anticipate is more of what we've seen since 21 October, a lot of unrest, likely more violence, and the sustainability of it is more the key topic here. How long will it last, and how long can people keep doing this has always been the question. If we look at the short to medium term, our position is the unrest will definitely continue with whatever comes out now. I think one of the communications that I've seen from Mondlane was that they should just sort of suspend Christmas or the festive period for this time, and resume unrest if the results are not in favor of the opposition. So definitely more unrest, more violence, depending on how the police react, because they have been a major factor influencing how things spiral. And then also the emotion factor. I don't think enough attention has been given to the emotion factor. The electorate is extremely frustrated, and if you think last year, I think it was May somewhere, a prominent Mozambican musician died, and there was a demonstration in favor or in honor of his life, and even then the emotions against the government started to show their face, started to surface. The situation calmed down after that, but even in the municipal elections, everywhere there was signs that the people are unhappy, they are frustrated, and a lot of what we are seeing now and the fact that it is lasting so long has to do with this emotional component, and the police reacting hard-handedly does not help the emotions at all. It exacerbates this feeling of oppression that we are seeing coming from the people in Mozambique. So definitely more unrest, and the violence will depend on how the government reacts and how emotional the people are. We've seen some pretty, let's say, gruesome stuff that has been brought on by emotions that have spiraled. To what extent it might happen after these election results, that remains to be seen. But we are definitely expecting a lot more unrest and probably more disruption to economic activity in Mozambique.
Well, how independent and credible is the Constitutional Council?
It is alleged that there's a lot of Frelimo influence in the Constitutional Council. Just going one step back to the National Elections Commission, that is made up of, it's a committee, and that committee is taken from the various political parties and then supposedly independent committee members as well, including some religious leaders. But it has been alleged that some of these religious leaders, they have also, their own biases. And then the committee itself does include, is leaning a bit more towards Frelimo than the other political parties. So when the results were announced, if you go look closely, it would say that the majority of that committee approved the election results. But majority does not mean outright majority. It was almost, 50-50, but still majority. So taking that kind of thinking and, let's say, tilted bias towards the ruling party into the Constitutional Council, which is supposed to be part of your judiciary, which is supposed to be a lot more independent and unbiased. The problem remains that the people still have the biases, and if you consider your post-colonial or your liberation political parties throughout Africa, it has been established that most, if not all of them, exert a massive amount of power and influence in the political scene. So you're taking that kind of thinking and applying it into Mozambique. It's entirely feasible that the same can be said to the Constitutional Council. And in fact, the opposition has decried this multiple times, that the Constitutional Council is biased towards Frelimo. So, it is a bit allegations at this stage, but the signs are there, the information is there in terms of studies on other case studies. So I would say probable that the Constitutional Council may be biased towards Frelimo. And the big thing that stands out for me that really shows how the elections was a bit biased is in the difference in the election results. So, it was widely expected that the race between Mondlane and Chapo would be very close, extremely close. But in several provinces, Daniel Chapo had like a runaway victory, which just doesn't make sense. In provinces where the opposition has a lot of support, Chapo still won very far. So this does bring into question the election results, and the problem is then if the Constitutional Council approves the results without any significant change, it comes back to why is that difference not as close to as it widely was expected to be, and if the population react to that similarly, and if it's widespread and majority participation from the population, from the electorate, now all of these circumstantial indicators will then point to the influence that the ruling party might have on the Constitutional Council.
So what is Mondlane's position? Because he's reported to be out of the country.
Yeah, so some sources say he was in South Africa, and other sources say that he's moving constantly to other countries to try and avoid any kind of backlash from other political entities. I can't say for sure where he might be, and he has received some critique. In the very beginning of these protests, he claimed that he would lead a march, and then he turned around and said he can't make it, his life is in danger. So for that, he has been criticized that he's not on the ground, that he's not leading his people, and that he's just, fueling unrest, and which the official narrative claims to be undemocratic behavior. So he has received critique from that. But on the other hand, if you think about a volatile political situation and he is breaking the status quo, case studies again would show that political opposers like these are bordering on revolutionaries. They don't have a good life expectancy in other African countries, and following that example, it makes sense that you might want to avoid being in country during this time, and questions about as to if he might return ever. So that's his position from outside. And then regarding his position on the elections or the results from the Constitutional Council, there are 2 points worth mentioning. On the one hand, he has rejected a repeat election. He claims that the results are there and he won. All the Constitutional Council has to do is, provide the accurate or according to him the truth, and then all will be good and you'll win, and then the situation will resolve itself. But Podemos, the party that supports him, and other opposition parties, they have supported the idea of a annulment of the election and then having a rerun at it. There's been speculation that Mondlane and Podemos might not be entirely on the same page, and it's still to be seen how that might play out. And if the big thing is that the opposition party, specifically Podemos and Mondlane, they will not accept any kind of handouts. So if we take this back to last year's municipal election, there were some irregularities. Frelimo won all of the municipalities save for Beira, which went to the MDN, and Renamo won nil. And so there was some backlash from Renamo, and the Constitutional Council then gave Renamo like 5 or 6 municipalities, and that was the end of it. And this time around, Mondlane and Podemos has said that they will not be settling for any handouts like this. They want the true results, and as a prerequisite on top of that is that if the Constitutional Council changes any of the results from the National Elections Commission, Podemos and Mondlane want to see the evidence and the information that warranted this change. They want to see that paper trail. So Podemos and Mondlane are applying a lot of pressure on the Constitutional Council to really, do the right thing. And this puts the Constitutional Council in a bit of a tricky spot.
Well, the South African and Mozambican ministers have been collaborating on what a potential solution. So what are the key elements of a proposed plan? Do you know what that is?
I have not seen the specifics on what they might discuss, but there is an inherent flaw with these kinds of engagements, and that is that they are engaging with Frelimo, essentially. I would want to see what kind of engagement Lamola would have with Mondlane as the other party and as the main guy fueling this. I don't know if you've seen, but the MK party, Zuma's MK party, invited Mondlane to participate in their dinner or gala or 1 year celebration. And despite all the issues with Zuma, at least he is engaging indirectly with Mondlane, even if perhaps opportunistic. But you'd expect the same if South Africa is going to take any kind of mediation role. If you speak to the ruling party, surely you will speak to the opposition as well to get to some kind of middle ground. Just speaking to Mozambique at this stage, other than asking them to compromise, I don't really see what there is to discuss between Lamola and, for example, you see it, but there's not much. Or asking them to, just handle the situation better, less police violence, perhaps taking measures, and this I've actually seen, taking measures to safeguard logistic routes from South Africa to Mozambique. Those would probably be top of the agenda. And I've seen some efforts from Mozambique to try and get some stability, because obviously this is causing havoc on the South African business sector, compromising that that route between Gauteng and the Maputo port. So I would say that will be probably on top. But as for remedying the situation as a whole, it will probably just be your normal status quo discussions, not anything.
You've just mentioned the economic implications and that the border post was once closed between South Africa and Mozambique, and it has affected flow of the traffic across the border. So, do you think that'll ease up, or do you think it might get worse if the situation remains unresolved?
No, that's a good question. So the border post has been closed repeatedly, and that has to do with how Mondlane is approaching it. Maybe it happened accidentally or he planned this, I'm not sure, but this phased approach that he has with the protest action, it essentially gives protesters a couple of days, to go sell their produce in the markets, be a human, make your living, and rest up, and then come back and protest the next week again. And this has given the whole unrest exceptional sustainability, as we've seen over the past, 8 or 9 weeks now. And so what happens at the border is when there's unrest, it closes, and then there may be a couple of days or even a week. We've seen 2 weeks now where things will be stable, and then the borders open again. But as soon as that unrest flares up again, the border has to close due to quite excessive unrest and violence we've been seeing close to the Lebombo border post. If the election result today is not in favor of the opposition, if Mondlane is not happy, there's a high risk that we will see that border post being interrupted again, probably forcing it to close again. Although you would have to factor in the information that there is possible efforts to stabilize the situation. It would make sense for the police and perhaps even the FDS, that is Mozambique's Defense and Security Forces, an umbrella term for essentially the military and the police, if they, implement some kind of measure to secure the road from the border post a few kilometers inland. The risk with that is that you would just, fuel the fire. If protesters come and the military or the police open fire, we've seen, the fear that the people have had for the FDS in the past, that has started to fizzle a bit. And we've seen footage of protesters still moving towards security forces, opening fire on them. And that speaks a lot to, again, the emotions of the people, their frustration, which is outweighing their fear potentially. And it would depend on the interaction between the security forces at the border and the protesters. So I think for the short term at least, and to be safe, definitely a high risk of disruption at that border post again. And if not at the post, it's a long road from the Lebombo port to Maputo port. And to secure that is impossible, the whole road. And all the protesters really need to do is disrupt a part of that road to disrupt traffic and, again, to apply the pressure on the economic sector again. So disrupted movement and logistics, very likely, if the results are not accepted by the opposition.
So why should the EU and the US worry about this? What interest have they shown in this Mozambican conflict?
I would say it goes back to your economy and your natural resources that they do get from South Africa that's exported. All of these basic economic factors would make sense. Other than that, politically, I would not say that the EU and the USA are too dependent on Mozambique or South Africa. The big thing for the EU might be the natural gas sector. That has also been disrupted to some extent. There is gas fields in Hambane province, which is just it's southern Mozambique, but a bit north of Maputo. We've seen some disruption there. It's possible that there may be some economic disruptions which could affect LNG in the global market, but likely not excessively. And the protests have not yet shown a significant disruption of the LNG developments in the north. That has more to do with the insurgency. There's also a massive coal mine in Tet province, running with a train line running from Tet to Nakala. We have seen unrest in Nakala as well, and again, that would have an impact on the coal industry in the world, but again, not massive, not truly significant. So definitely some knock-on effects economically speaking. And I would venture to say on the political side, if the US and the EU do nothing, that may also be frowned upon. But the EU did observe the elections, and they did mention that there were gross irregularities, and they were not allowed to observe certain polling stations. So I think the EU has done their part in terms of condemning the irregularities. But to my mind, those are the main issues regarding the USA and the EU.
Are you worried that it might escalate into another war? Because, I mean, the memory of the war between Renamo and Frelimo is still fresh in Mozambique.
That is also another good question. Mondlane has reiterated that he does not really want to go that route. He wants to do it the political way, the institutional way. The portion of political actors in Mozambique that would be more prone to taking up arms would be Renamo and their supporters. They were the main opposers in the civil war. And on that note, we've seen recurring reports of Renamo's veterans storming their headquarters and demanding that Usufra Mamade, which is Renamo's leader, be removed, to have him step down because they are not happy with his leadership. I would say that is a bit of a wild card. If, for whatever reason, those veterans decide to side with Malane and the situation spiraling into them taking up arms against the state, I won't say it's likely, but it is a wild card. It is a possibility, though at the very low end of possibilities. But it goes back to emotions. We've seen the situation spiraling further than Mondlane has called for in many occasions. We've seen protesters freeing prisoners. We've seen protesters taking the firearms of the police, and the police is in a campaign at the moment to recover those firearms. And so we've seen that happen. We've seen isolated incidents of protesters killing members of the police. So at this stage, we are more teetering the line of rioting. But revolution, civil war, I think it's not impossible, but it is a bit of a far way away, or hopefully, for Mozambique. The big factor would be more, how does Frelimo react to this, and how diplomatic can they be while maintaining their power in government. That would be a big deciding factor on what happens next. And then again, the people are also frustrated, but the question is, are they frustrated enough to engage in another war? People are a bit tired of wars and conflict, and I think the insurgency in the north has also really exhausted people for this kind of conflict. So it's not impossible, I would say, but it remains to be seen if they would go that far.
Well, just the last question. Is the power sharing agreement possible?
You mean like a government
South
of national
Africa,
unity?
yeah,
Like,
government of national,
yeah. So
yeah.
it has been a prominent topic of discussion in Mozambican media. I think the big issue, there are two issues with this. Firstly, you have a liberation party that has power in that country for decades, a generation. Actually, Daniel Chapo is the first presidential candidate that was born after, independence. So a whole generation that the Frelimo has had time to take control and exert, to permeate essentially the whole economic, social, and political landscape of Mozambique. To give up that kind of power and to share it with the opposition, that's a tall order. It would be, ceding a significant degree of power, and not only that, but lifting the veil of whatever is going on in that government, and to give that insight to the opposition, which can tear them apart in the next election. I don't know. I'm not convinced that Frelimo would want to do that. Perhaps on a smaller scale, but again, then it goes back to the issue of Frelimo and Mondlane not wanting handouts, and that's the big issue. And Mondlane repeating that he won the elections, he has to be president. So, government sharing, when you have this narrative of the main opposition claiming that he has to be president, that's what, according to him, what the election results say. It also complicates the idea of any kind of government of national unity. I think Podemos might be convinced to be open to such a position, but Mondlane looks like he's putting his foot down and just saying no. And again, it is also difficult if these main opposers, if Mondlane and Podemos go back on their word and compromise when they have been, peddling this narrative of we refuse to compromise, what would that, portray to their supporters? It is a tricky situation, and I'm not entirely sure if any kind of power sharing is a feasible and acceptable way, at least in the perception of the opposition, to move forward. And that's also why the Constitutional Council has this really uncomfortable position. They can't compromise, they can't give handouts, they can't bribe, they can't give the Frelimo the win, because then there's unrest. So my own working projection would be that Frelimo will win. Constitutional Council confirm this, and then it will be a case of just waiting this unrest out until the people can't fight anymore, and then we just go on to businesses as usual. How long that might take is a question in itself, and how much force the government would need to apply to really, deter any further unrest is another question. There are multiple factors that we will see, and I think this first half of the 2025 will be unstable, and a lot of political play going on, and perhaps more controversy.
Tertius Jacobs, thanks so much for speaking to us.
Thank you for listening to me.